Welcome to Night Whisper. Night Whisper brings you the darkest tales from the shadows. Join our community. Subscribe, leave a like, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams. The briefing room had the smell of old coffee and fear. Victor Lane was seated opposite me, his aged face lit up by the soft illumination of a laptop screen. And outside, beyond the hardened windows, there was the Appalachian landscape of mountains that vanished into darkness, their summit tops lost in swirling mists of eternal fog. "This is your redemption, Holt," Victor said, sliding the manila envelope across the metal tabletop. 5 years of field work or 15 in the federal prison cell, your decision was already made. I opened the folder. Photos that shouldn't exist were inside, beings that couldn't exist. Too many limbs, odd eye placement, bodies that stretched and compressed between images. Every image was labeled with XY coordinates, date stamps, and alphanumeric markers that I couldn't translate yet. "What are they?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Subjects," Victor responded briefly. "You don't have to understand them. You just have to tag them, track them, and note their movements. The Enclave has been surveying these mountains for 60 years. You're just the new eyes they have in the region." I had been a park ranger once, before the incident that landed me in county lockup. Before I learned that some rules exist for reasons beyond human understanding. The judge had given me a choice: serve my time or serve something else. Something that had been watching the wilderness long before any of us. "Tag and track," I repeated. "That's it?" Victor's expression hardened. "That's everything. You follow the protocol, you maintain your monitoring equipment, you document their patterns, and under no circumstances do you interfere with them or any civilians who might wander into the restricted zones. What if someone's in danger? Then you document it." His voice was ice. "This isn't a rescue operation, Holt. This is surveillance. The moment you start playing hero, you compromise the entire program. The Enclave didn't pull you from prison to save lives. They pulled you because you know these mountains and you follow orders." I wanted to argue, wanted to say that wasn't who I was anymore. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. 6 months in a cell gives you time to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Victor stood, closing his laptop with a decisive click. "Your first field assignment starts at 0400. Delta 7 station is 12 miles into the restricted zone. You'll have a radio, GPS tracker, and a tranquilizer rifle loaded with specialized rounds. Use them only if a subject becomes aggressive toward you personally. The tags are in your field kit, along with the monitoring protocols." "How many subjects am I tracking?" "Currently? 7 confirmed in your sector, but the count changes. They migrate. New ones appear. Some disappear." He paused at the door. "And Holt, if you see something that isn't in the database, you call it in immediately. No investigation, no heroics, just call." After he left, I sat alone with the folder, studying each photograph until the images burned into my memory. Subject D, 7. Alpha. A quadruped with elongated limbs and a face that looked almost human from certain angles. Subject D, 7. Beta. Something serpentine that left tracks suggesting it moved both above and below ground. 7 subjects, 7 nightmares. I didn't sleep that night. The hike to Delta 7 station began in pre-dawn darkness, my headlamp cutting a narrow path through ancient forest. The trail markers were subtle, barely visible scrapes on tree bark that only someone with my training would recognize. Every 100 yards, I passed motion sensors disguised as natural formations. The Enclave's surveillance grid was comprehensive and invisible. The weight of the field kit pulled at my shoulders. Tranquilizer rifle, tagging equipment, emergency beacon, water purification tablets, medical supplies. Everything I might need for a week alone in the wilderness, monitoring things that shouldn't exist. By the time I reached the station, Dawn was breaking through the canopy in pale shafts of light. Delta 7 was a weathered cabin built into the mountainside, camouflaged so well I almost walked past it. Inside, the space was split between living quarters and a monitoring station equipped with screens showing feeds from dozens of trail cameras. I set down my pack and activated the system. The screens flickered to life, displaying various angles of forest, streams, and rock formations. In the corner of each feed, a timestamp and coordinate readout. I was looking at a dozen different locations simultaneously, all within a 5-mile radius. My radio crackled. Delta 7, this is Command. Confirm station activation. Command, this is Delta 7. Station active. Agent Holt on duty. Copy that. Your first subject is D7 Charlie, last tracked moving northeast along Ridgeline 4. Recommend you establish a tracking position at waypoint Gamma 3. Tag replacement is priority 1. I checked my map. Waypoint Gamma 3 was a rocky outcrop about 2 miles west, offering a clear view of Ridgeline 4. Perfect ambush point for monitoring. Understood, Command. Moving to Gamma 3. The hike was easier now, with daylight filtering through the trees, but the forest felt wrong, too quiet. I'd spent years in these mountains before my arrest, and I knew their rhythms. The absence of birdsong, the way even the wind seemed hesitant to move through the branches, it all suggested something unnatural nearby. I reached Gamma 3 and set up my observation post behind a cluster of boulders. Through my binoculars, I scanned Ridgeline 4. The tree line was thick, offering plenty of cover for something that didn't want to be seen. Then I saw it. Subject D7. Charlie emerged from the undergrowth like liquid shadow. Its body was vaguely canine, but the proportions were all wrong. Legs too long, spine too flexible, head too narrow. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, testing the air with visible tremors that ran along its dark fur. I raised the tranquilizer rifle, centered the scope on its hindquarters where the old tag was barely visible. The Enclave's tags were designed to fall off after 6 months, requiring replacement to maintain tracking data. My job was to sedate the subject, replace the tag, and document its condition. The shot was clean. D7. Charlie jerked, stumbled, then slowly crumpled to the forest floor. I waited the required 10 minutes for the sedative to take full effect before approaching. Up close, the creature was even more disturbing. Its breathing was shallow but steady, and its eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle pattern, remained partially open, tracking my movements with an awareness that shouldn't exist in a sedated animal. I worked quickly, removing the old tag and attaching the new one to a thicker patch of hide near its shoulder. The tag clicked into place, and my handheld scanner confirmed activation. Subject D7. Charlie was back in the system. As I backed away, the creature's third eye focused directly on me. I could have sworn I saw recognition there, understanding, and something that might have been hunger. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Wake before dawn, check the monitoring feeds, track and tag subjects based on Command's assignments. D7 Alpha in a creek bed. D7 Echo near an abandoned mine shaft. D7 Delta prowling the edges of the restricted zone. I fell into the rhythm of it. The isolation, the routine, the careful documentation of creatures that officially didn't exist. Victor called in twice daily for status reports, his questions always the same. Any anomalies, any breaches, any contact with civilians? No, no, no. Until the 4th day. I was monitoring the western perimeter feeds when I noticed something wrong in camera 17. The timestamp showed current time, but the feed was frozen. Not black, not static, frozen mid-frame, showing a section of trail that led toward the tourist areas outside the restricted zone. I switched to camera 16, which covered an adjacent area, also frozen. Same with cameras 15 and 18. Command, this is Delta 7. I have multiple camera failures in Western Sector, requesting permission to investigate. Static crackled for a long moment before Victor's voice came through. Negative, Delta 7. Maintain station. We're seeing the same feeds here. Likely a power surge from the storm system moving in. Cameras will reset automatically. But there was no storm. The sky was clear, the barometric pressure stable. I'd learned to read the Enclave's lies by now. Something had taken out those cameras, and Command didn't want me to know what. I spent the next hour watching the functional feeds, looking for any sign of what might have caused the outage. The subjects were behaving normally. If anything that unnatural could be called normal. They kept to their territories, avoided each other, followed patterns I'd begun to recognize. Then, at 14:37 hours, I heard it. A scream, human, distant, coming from the direction of the dead cameras. I grabbed my radio. Command, this is Delta 7. I have possible civilian contact in restricted zone, Western Sector. Request clearance to investigate. Negative, Delta 7. Victor's voice was sharp. Maintain your position. That area is outside your assigned patrol zone. Command, I heard a scream. Someone might be injured. You heard wildlife. Audio distortion is common in the mountains. Do not leave your station. The scream came again, closer this time. Definitely human, definitely terrified. I stared at the radio, at the monitoring screens, at the rifle leaning against the wall. Every instinct I'd ever had as a ranger was screaming at me to move, to help, to do something. But I'd signed a contract, made a deal. Follow the protocol or go back to prison. The third scream was cut short. I grabbed my rifle and field kit and ran. The trail was barely visible, overgrown from years of disuse. I moved fast, using my GPS to navigate toward the coordinates where the cameras had failed. The forest grew denser, the canopy thicker, until I was running through perpetual twilight. My radio erupted. Delta 7, you are in violation of direct orders. Return to station immediately. I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. All my focus was on the trail ahead, on the sounds that grew clearer with each step. Branches breaking, labored breathing, and underneath it all, a wet, sliding sound that made my skin crawl. I burst into a small clearing and froze. A man, mid-30s, outdoor gear, expensive hiking boots, was pressed against a rocky outcrop, his face white with terror. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood soaked through his torn pants. But what held my attention was the thing circling him. Subject D7 Beta, the serpentine one. It was larger than I'd expected from the photographs, easily 20 feet long and thick as my torso. Its scales were a diseased gray-green that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The head was wedge-shaped, almost shovel-like, with sensory organs I couldn't identify pulsing along its length. The creature hadn't noticed me yet. It was too focused on the injured hiker, circling slowly, testing the air with a forked tongue that split into 3 tips instead of 2. I raised the tranquilizer rifle, but my hands were shaking. The dosage was calculated for each subject based on estimated weight and metabolism. Too little and I'd just anger it. Too much and I might kill it, which would bring down consequences from the Enclave that made prison look appealing. The hiker saw me. His eyes went wide, mouth opening to call out. "Don't move," I whispered, but it was too late. 7. Beta's head sapped toward me, its multiple eyes fixing me with an intelligence that no reptile should possess. For a frozen moment, we stared at each other. Predator and interloper, monster and man. Then it lunged. I fired. The dart hit its flank mid-strike, and the creature's momentum carried it forward even as the sedative began to work. I dove sideways, felt scales rasp against my jacket, smelled something like rotten eggs and copper. D7. Beta crashed into the trees behind me, thrashing as the tranquilizer took effect. I scrambled to my feet, ready to fire again, but the creature was already slowing. Its movements became sluggish, then ceased entirely. The hiker was sobbing. "Oh God! Oh God! What is that thing?" I crossed to him, checking his leg. Compound fracture, but the bleeding wasn't arterial, survivable if we moved fast. "What's your name?" "Trevor. Trevor Morrison. I was just hiking. I stayed on the trail. I didn't do anything wrong." "You're in a restricted zone, Trevor. How did you get past the barriers?" "What barriers?" "I followed the trail markers. There were no signs, no warnings." He broke off, staring at the unconscious creature. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my radio. "Command, this is Delta 7. I have a civilian casualty, compound fracture of the left tibia. Subject D7 Beta is sedated, requesting immediate medical evacuation." Silence. Then Victor's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Delta 7, you were ordered to maintain station. You are currently in violation of Protocol 7, Section 3. You do not have authorization to engage subjects or assist civilians. Command, this man will die without treatment. That is not your concern. You will leave the civilian where he is and return to station immediately. A containment team will handle the situation." Trevor was staring at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They're going to let me die, aren't they? To protect their secret." "No," I said. "They're not." I switched off the radio and pulled Trevor to his feet, supporting his weight. "Can you hop?" "I think so, but..." "Then hop. We're getting you out of here." Behind us, D7 Beta was beginning to stir. The sedative wouldn't last forever, and when it woke, it would be angry. We made it maybe 50 yards before I heard the sound of someone moving through the brush ahead. I raised my rifle, ready for another subject, another nightmare. Instead, a man stepped into view. 60s, lean and weathered, carrying a lever-action rifle that looked well used. He wore civilian clothes, but something in his bearing screamed military training. "You must be Holt," he said. His voice was rough, like he'd spent years breathing smoke. "And you just made the stupidest decision of your life." "Who are you?" "Noah Briggs. I hunt things. Have been for 40 years, long before the Enclave started their little science project." He looked past me at Trevor, then at the stirring form of D7 Beta in the distance. "You broke protocol to save him?" "I couldn't just let him die." Noah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The Enclave doesn't hire rangers anymore, do they? They hire prisoners, people desperate enough to accept deals they don't understand." He shouldered his rifle. "Well, since you've already blown your career to hell, might as well do it properly. Let's get your civilian out of here before things get worse." "Things can get worse?" "Son, they always get worse." We moved as quickly as Trevor's injury allowed, Noah leading us along paths that didn't appear on any Enclave map. He moved through the forest like he'd been born in it, never hesitating, never checking landmarks. Just smooth, practiced navigation that spoke of decades in these mountains. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. "I've been tracking the Enclave for 20 years. You people aren't as invisible as you think." He glanced back at me. "Though I'll admit, I didn't expect to find someone willing to break ranks. Most of your colleagues are true believers, or too scared to care about collateral damage." "I was a ranger. Before." "I know. I read your file. Manslaughter charge, 3 counts. Hikers died on your watch because you delayed calling for rescue. Thought you could handle it alone." The words hit like a physical blow. "That's not what happened." "Isn't it?" Noah stopped at a stream, helping Trevor sit on a fallen log while checking his compass. "You made a call. It was the wrong call. People died, just like people will die if you don't understand what you're really dealing with out here." Trevor was pale, his breathing shallow. Shock was setting in. I needed to get him to a hospital, not stand here being lectured by a stranger. "The Enclave has resources," I said. "Medical facilities, helicopters." "The Enclave has protocols," Noah cut me off. And those protocols don't include saving civilians who stumble into restricted zones. They include containment, suppression, making sure no evidence of their subjects ever reaches the public. You're saying they'll kill him? I'm saying they'll do what they think is necessary, which might be killing him, might be sedating him, erasing his memory, and dumping him somewhere with a plausible story about a fall. Might be recruiting him like they recruited you. Noah resumed walking. Either way, your Trevor Morrison ceases to exist as the person he was. That's how the Enclave works. We reached a logging road after another half-mile of hiking. Noah's truck was parked in a clearing, a battered Ford that had seen better decades. He helped me load Trevor into the passenger seat, then turned to me. You've got about 30 minutes before they track you here. Maybe less, depending on how good their satellite coverage is today. Where are you taking him? Hospital in Asheville. I've got contacts who'll make sure his story stays consistent. Hiking accident, fell down a ravine, found by a good Samaritan. He handed me a card with nothing but a phone number. You're going to need help, Holt. The Enclave doesn't forgive broken protocols. Call me when you're ready to learn what's really happening in these mountains. I signed a contract, 5 years or prison. And you just voided that contract. So now you've got a choice, run and hide or stay and fight. But make it quick, because they're coming. The truck's engine roared to life. Noah gave me a final look through the window, something like respect in his weathered face, then drove off in a cloud of dust. I stood alone on the logging road, listening to the forest. It was too quiet. Had been since I found Trevor. Like the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. My radio crackled to life. Agent Holt, this is Victor Lane. We need to talk. I looked down at the device in my hand, at the blinking light that meant they were tracking my position, at the choice that had already been made the moment I pulled that trigger to save Trevor. I'm listening, I said. Return to Delta 7 station immediately. This is not a request. Your actions have compromised the entire monitoring program. Subject D7 Beta is unaccounted for. We have a civilian breach, and you've made contact with a known hostile. Noah Briggs is hostile? Noah Briggs is a fanatic who has spent decades trying to expose the Enclave. He's dangerous, unstable, and you just gave him exactly what he needed, a field agent willing to talk. I didn't tell him anything. You didn't have to. Your actions told him everything. That there are still people in our organization who value human life over protocol. That's leverage, Holt. That's ammunition he'll use against us. I started walking, not toward Delta 7, but deeper into the forest, toward a ridge I'd scouted earlier in the week where the tree cover was thick enough to break satellite tracking. You want me to come in? I want you to stop making this worse. That civilian had a name, Trevor Morrison. He has a family, probably, a life. You were going to let him die to protect your secrets. Victor's voice hardened. Those secrets protect millions, Holt. You think we're the monsters? We keep the real monsters contained. We study them, track them, make sure they don't wander into populated areas. Every tag you placed, every report you filed, that's part of a network that's prevented dozens of deaths this year alone. And Trevor? Trevor is acceptable loss. That's the calculation we make every day. Save the many by sacrificing the few. You were supposed to understand that. I reached the ridge, found a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall, a place I'd marked on my personal map as a fallback position. Inside, the signal degraded, Victor's voice breaking into static. You're choosing prison over redemption, he said through the interference. Everything we offered you, gone. You'll be hunted by the same people you worked for. Do you understand that? I understand, I said. I understand perfectly. I switched off the radio and went deeper into the cave. The cave system extended farther than I'd initially explored. I followed a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber, my headlamp revealing walls covered in markings. Not modern graffiti, but symbols that predated any language I recognized, spirals and geometric patterns carved deep into the limestone. In the center of the chamber was evidence someone had been here recently. A camp setup, sleeping bag, portable stove, notebooks stacked in waterproof cases. Someone's research station hidden from the Enclave's surveillance. I opened one of the notebooks. The handwriting was tight, precise, accompanied by detailed sketches. Anatomical drawings of the subjects, behavioral notes, migration patterns tracked over decades. Noah Briggs's work, I realized. This was his base of operations. A page caught my attention. Subject classification system, Enclave versus reality. According to Noah's notes, the Enclave's subject designations were wrong. What they classified as random entities were actually part of a complex ecosystem. The creatures weren't anomalies. They were native. And they'd been here long before humans decided these mountains were ours. D7 Beta, the serpentine creature I'd sedated, was marked as a sentinel, a guardian species that prevented something worse from emerging from deeper cave systems. D7 Alpha, the quasi-canine, was a cleaner. It consumed organic matter that would otherwise attract more dangerous predators. The Enclave wasn't monitoring random monsters. They were disrupting a balanced system, one that had existed for millennia. I heard footsteps in the passage behind me. Instinct sent my hand to the tranquilizer rifle, but I forced myself to relax. If it was an Enclave team, they'd have already announced themselves. Noah emerged from the shadows, looking unsurprised to find me in his hideout. "Made yourself comfortable? You knew I'd come here. I gambled on it. You struck me as someone who asks questions." He set down a pack, began unloading supplies. "How's your friend Trevor?" "You tell me." "Stable. Compound fracture set properly, no infection. He'll be telling stories about his hiking accident for years, never knowing how close he came to disappearing entirely." Noah pulled out a bottle of whiskey, took a long drink, then offered it to me. "You made an enemy today, Holt. Victor Lane doesn't forgive broken protocols." I took the bottle, let the burn settle my nerves. "Tell me about the Sentinels." Noah smiled. "So you found my research. Good. That means I don't have to start from the beginning." He sat cross-legged on the cave floor, his rifle within easy reach. "What did the Enclave tell you these creatures were?" "Subjects. Things to monitor and contain." "They're liars. These mountains have been inhabited by what we call cryptids for thousands of years. Native Americans knew about them, left warning symbols, established territories where humans didn't go. Then European settlers arrived, started pushing into forbidden zones, and the incidents began." Incidents? Disappearances. Entire hunting parties gone without a trace. Livestock mutilated in ways that didn't match any known predator. Miners who went into certain caves and came back changed. Noah's expression darkened. The government started paying attention after World War II, created the Enclave in 1947, same year as Roswell. But they weren't looking at the sky. They were looking at what lived under our feet. I thought about the subjects I'd been tagging, the intelligence I'd seen in their eyes. They're not animals. No, they're something else, older. The Sentinels, like your D7 Beta, they guard transition points between our world and elsewhere. The cleaners maintain balance. There are others, watchers, harvesters, keepers. Each has a role in an ecosystem we barely understand. And the Enclave disrupts it. The Enclave thinks they can control it. But every tag they place, every tracking device they implant, it interferes with natural behaviors. Makes the creatures agitated, unpredictable. Noah took back the whiskey bottle. 20 years ago, incidents in these mountains averaged maybe 2 or 3 per year. Now, dozens. Because the Enclave keeps poking the hornet's nest. Outside the cave, night had fallen completely. In the darkness, I heard sounds that didn't belong to any animal I'd learned about in ranger training. Calls that made my bones ache. Movement that suggested things too large to fit in the spaces I knew existed. "So, what do?" I asked. "I broke their protocols, saved one person. That doesn't change the system." "No," Noah agreed. But it's a start. The Enclave recruits people like you because they're desperate and isolated. They keep you separate, feed you just enough information to do your job, make sure you never see the bigger picture. But you asked questions. You broke ranks. That means others might too. You're talking about exposing them. I'm talking about changing them. The Enclave has resources, infrastructure, decades of research. Imagine if that was directed toward coexistence instead of control, toward understanding instead of containment. It sounded naive, idealistic, but sitting in that cave, surrounded by evidence of an ancient world that defied modern science, I couldn't dismiss it entirely. My satellite phone buzzed. I'd almost forgotten I was carrying it. The screen showed an encrypted message from Victor. You have 12 hours to return to custody. After that, you become a fugitive and will be treated as such. This is your only warning. Noah read the message over my shoulder. 12 hours. That's generous by Enclave standards. Victor must actually like you. So I run? You decide what matters more, your freedom or the truth. He stood, began packing his research notes. I'm leaving this base. They'll find it eventually now that you've been here. But I have others. Safer locations where the Enclave's surveillance doesn't reach. And if I come with you? Then you become part of the resistance. Such as it is. 3 people scattered across the Appalachians, trying to document what the Enclave won't acknowledge and protect what they won't protect. He offered his hand. It's not much of an army, but it's what we have. I looked at his hand, at the choice it represented. Return to the Enclave and face consequences. Run and hide. Or stay and fight for something bigger than my own survival. I thought about Trevor Morrison, who would never know how close he came to becoming another disappeared person, about the subjects I'd tagged, going about their ancient purposes while being studied like lab rats, about the ranger I used to be, before I learned to follow protocols instead of my conscience. I shook Noah's hand. Teach me, I said. Everything the Enclave doesn't want me to know. Noah grinned. Now we're getting somewhere. The next week was a crash course in guerrilla research. Noah had a network of observation posts throughout the mountains, locations he'd established over decades of independent study. We moved between them, staying ahead of Enclave patrols, documenting behaviors that official reports never mentioned. I learned that D7 Alpha, the quasi-canine, was actually a juvenile. Its mother was still out there, larger and more protective than any Enclave file suggested. I learned that D7 Beta's den was located beneath an abandoned coal mine in caves that extended miles into the mountain, connecting to underground systems that predated human settlement. Most importantly, I learned that the Enclave's presence was making things worse. Look at this, Noah said one night, showing me correlation data he'd compiled. 3 months after the Enclave established Delta 7 Station, incidents of aggressive creature behavior in that sector increased by 40%. 6 months after they started tagging subjects, migration patterns shifted, bringing creatures into contact with human settlements they'd historically avoided. They're creating the problems they claim to solve. Exactly. And every time something goes wrong, their response is more surveillance, more control, tighter protocols. They're locked in a spiral that only ends one way. Catastrophic failure. I thought about Victor, about his cold certainty that acceptable losses were necessary, about the system that valued data over lives, control over understanding. We need to get this information out, I said. The public deserves to know what's happening in these mountains. Noah shook his head. The public won't believe it. Show them photographs, they'll call them fake. Show them physical evidence, they'll dismiss it as hoaxes. The Enclave knows this. They've been managing information for 70 years. Then what's the point? If we can't expose them, can't change them, what are we doing out here? We're documenting, we're protecting, we're making sure that when the system finally fails, and it will fail, Holt, there's a record of what really happened. Someone who can tell the truth. My satellite phone buzzed again. Another message from Victor. Your time is up. Containment teams are being deployed. Surrender yourself at Delta 7 station within 24 hours or face immediate apprehension. I showed Noah the message. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the words like they were written in code. They're not going to let you go, he finally said. You know too much. You've made contact with me. Even if you surrendered, best case scenario is they lock you in some black site. Make sure you can't talk. Worst case? Worst case? You disappear. Just another hiker who went into the mountains and never came back. I thought about prison, about the cell I'd traded for this mission, about the deal that was supposed to give me redemption, but it only led me deeper into moral compromise. I'm not going back, I said, to them or to prison. Then you're committed now. No half measures, no second guessing. Noah pulled out his map, marked several locations. These are the deepest parts of the restricted zone, areas where even the Enclave's surveillance is spotty. You can hide there, maybe indefinitely, but that's just survival, not purpose. What's the alternative? We go active. Start documenting the things they don't want documented. Interfere with their operations when they threaten the creatures or civilians. Become a real problem instead of just a nuisance. It was insane. Taking on a government black ops program with decades of resources and infrastructure. But the alternative, hiding in caves, watching from the shadows while the Enclave continued its disruptive work, felt like giving up. How do we start? Noah's grin was sharp. We've got an advantage they don't expect. You know their protocols, their monitoring schedules, their blind spots, and I know the mountains better than any satellite map. We combine that knowledge, we can be exactly where we need to be when they don't expect us. You're talking about sabotage. I'm talking about protection. The Enclave is planning to expand their tagging program. They want to implant neural monitors in 12 new subjects next month. Invasive procedures that have a 40% mortality rate and drive the survivors into aggressive behavior patterns. He showed me the intelligence he'd gathered, documentation stolen from Enclave supply shipments. We stop that program, we prevent a lot of suffering. How? That's what we need to figure out. The plan took shape over 3 days of reconnaissance. The Enclave was bringing in their neural monitoring equipment through a supply depot at the northern edge of the restricted zone. The shipment would arrive by helicopter, be stored overnight in a secured facility, then distributed to field stations the following morning. Noah had been watching this depot for months, mapping its security patterns. 2 guards, rotating shifts every 6 hours. Cameras covering the perimeter but not the roof. Motion sensors that could be avoided if you knew their placement. It's not Fort Knox, Noah said, but it doesn't have to be. The Enclave relies on isolation. Nobody in their right mind would attack one of their facilities. We're not in our right minds? Clearly not, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. The night of the operation, we approached from the western ridge, using terrain that kept us below the camera sightlines. The facility was a prefabricated structure that looked like a maintenance shed from the outside, but the reinforced walls and sophisticated locks told a different story. Noah disabled the motion sensors with a portable jamming device he'd built from commercial electronics. 30-second window, he whispered. After that, they'll notice the disruption. I moved fast, using bolt cutters on the perimeter fence, then a pry bar on the door lock. Inside, the facility was stocked with equipment I recognized from my brief time as an Enclave agent. Tagging guns, sedative cartridges, medical supplies. And in the center of the room, a dozen cases containing neural monitoring devices, small, disc-shaped implants designed to be surgically placed at the base of a creature's skull. 20 seconds, Noah said from the doorway. I grabbed 2 cases, checking their contents. Each held 5 implants, along with surgical tools and installation guides. 60 implants total in the shipment. 60 subjects that would be violated, monitored from within, their natural behaviors corrupted by invasive technology. Holt, we need to move. I set the cases down and pulled out the thermite grenades Noah had reluctantly provided. You sure about this? Hell no, but we're past the point of half measures. I placed the grenades, set the timers for 2 minutes, and ran. We were 50 yards into the tree line when the facility erupted in white-hot fire. The thermite burned through the equipment, the cases, everything inside the structure. $2 million of Enclave technology reduced to slag and ashes. Alarms blared. Helicopter rotors thudded in the distance. The Enclave's response would be immediate and overwhelming. Noah and I split up, each taking pre-planned routes toward different safe houses. We'd meet again in 3 days at a location only he knew, compare notes, plan the next move. As I ran through the dark forest, hearing the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not quite freedom, not quite redemption, but purpose. The certainty that I was finally doing something that mattered, even if it cost me everything. The safe house was a hunting cabin deep in the most remote section of the restricted zone. Noah had stocked it years ago with supplies, weapons, and research materials. I arrived at dawn, exhausted but alive, and immediately checked the perimeter. No sign of Enclave patrols. Yet, inside, I found food, water, and a note from Noah. Lay low. They'll be aggressive for the next 72 hours. Then resource constraints will force them to scale back. Stay off all electronic devices. Trust nothing. N. I spent 3 days in that cabin, watching the forest through boarded windows, listening for helicopters or tracking teams. The subjects were active. I could hear them moving through the darkness, their calls echoing across the ridges. But they kept their distance, as if they understood I was hiding from something. On the third night, I heard something different, not the sounds of the creatures or the forest. Footsteps. Human. Methodical. Coming up the trail toward the cabin with the careful precision of trained operators. I grabbed my rifle, took position behind the overturned table I'd been using as a desk. Through gaps in the boards, I could see flashlight beams cutting through the trees, at least 3 people moving in tactical formation. The footsteps stopped at the door. A moment of silence. Then a voice I knew too well. "Caleb, it's Victor. We need to talk." I didn't respond, didn't move. "I'm alone," Victor continued. "The team is staying back. I asked them to give us privacy, professional courtesy. I'm done with the Enclave. I know, and I understand why. But there are things you need to hear before you commit to this path." A pause. "I'm going to open the door now. My sidearm is holstered. Please, don't shoot me." The door opened slowly. Victor stepped inside, hands visible, moving with the careful deliberation of someone approaching a wild animal. In the dim light filtering through the boards, he looked older than I remembered. Tired. "You destroyed $2 million of equipment," he said. "Set our neural monitoring program back 18 months. Command wants you hunted down and made an example of. And you? I want you to understand what you're protecting." He pulled out a tablet, activated it to show a map of the restricted zone. Dozens of red markers indicating subject locations. These things you're defending, they're not innocent. Last year, Subject D7 Kilo killed a ranger who got too close to its den, tore him apart. Subject D7, Foxtrot attacked a school bus that took a wrong turn into the zone. We contained it before there were casualties, but it was close. Because your tagging programs disrupted their behaviors. That's Briggs talking. He's filled your head with theories that have no scientific basis. He's filled my head with observations, data you don't want to acknowledge because it contradicts your protocols. Victor sat down heavily on an old chair. "You think we're the villains, that we're out here torturing helpless creatures for some sinister purpose. But every protocol we follow, every tag we place, it's based on decades of experience with things that have killed hundreds of people. Things that lived peacefully in these mountains for thousands of years before you started interfering." Peacefully? Talk to the families who lost loved ones to them. Ask the local communities who have folklore about children who wandered into the woods and never returned. These creatures are dangerous, Caleb. Managing them, understanding them, that's the only thing preventing widespread disaster. I lowered the rifle slightly. You could have explained this, could have shown me the full picture instead of feeding me protocols. And if we had? If we'd shown you every death, every incident, every close call, would you have been able to do the job? Or would you have spent every mission second-guessing, hesitating, getting yourself killed? Victor met my eyes. We recruits people like you because you follow orders, because you understand that sometimes the individual has to be sacrificed for the greater good. Like Trevor Morrison. Yes, like Trevor Morrison. One life weighed against the stability of the entire program. It's not a calculation I enjoy, but it's one I have to make. That's where we differ, I said. I don't think you get to make that calculation. Every life matters. Every choice matters. Victor stood slowly. Then, you're choosing to become a fugitive, to spend the rest of your life running from us, undermining programs designed to protect millions. That's your decision? It is. He nodded, like he'd expected this answer. I respect that. Even though it makes you an enemy of the organization, I respect the principle behind it. He moved toward the door, then paused. But Caleb, understand what you're up against. The Enclave has been operating for 70 years. We have resources you can't imagine, reach you can't escape. You might evade capture for weeks, maybe months. But eventually, we'll find you. And when we do, there won't be any more professional courtesy. I'll take my chances. I hope you survive long enough to realize you're wrong about us. I genuinely do. Victor stepped outside, the darkness swallowing him almost immediately. Good luck, Caleb. You're gonna need it. I listened to his footsteps fade, heard the distant sound of vehicles starting. Driving away. He'd kept his word about coming alone. But that wouldn't last. The next team wouldn't offer conversation. I gathered my supplies, prepared to abandon the cabin. As I packed, I found something I'd missed before. A sealed envelope with my name on it, left by Noah. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a creature I'd never seen before, massive and ancient, with features that defied description. On the back, Noah had written, D7 Omega. The reason the Enclave exists, the thing they're really trying to contain. Everything else is just practice. Below that, coordinates. Deep in the restricted zone, in an area marked as completely off limits, even to Enclave personnel. I stared at the photograph, at the implications. The subjects I'd been tagging weren't the real threat. They were the guards, the watchers, the first line of defense against something far worse. And the Enclave's interference was weakening that defense. The coordinates led me to a region of the Appalachians I'd never explored, where the mountains became steep enough to discourage casual hiking, and the forests grew so dense that sunlight was just a rumor. My GPS struggled to maintain signal, and I had to navigate by compass and dead reckoning for the final 5 miles. I found Noah at the coordinates, standing at the edge of a massive sinkhole that descended into darkness. The opening was at least 200 feet across, ringed by ancient trees that grew at impossible angles, their roots exposed as if the earth had dropped away beneath them. "You came," Noah said, not looking away from the pit. "Good. You need to see this." "What is this place?" "Local folklore calls it the Devil's Throat. Native Americans wouldn't come within a mile of it. They left warning markers. You can still find them if you know what to look for. Symbols that mean forbidden and death, and that which waits below." I peered over the edge. The sinkhole descended beyond the reach of my headlamp. The walls, smooth stone worn by water that must have flowed here millennia ago. But there was no water now, just darkness, and a smell like old copper and electricity. D7 Omega is down there? Has been for as long as anyone can remember? The Sentinels, the cleaners, all the creatures the Enclave monitors, they're here to make sure Omega stays down there. It's their purpose, their reason for existing in these mountains. What happens if it gets out? Noah finally looked at me. Nothing good. The one time it tried, back in 1952, the Enclave threw everything they had at forcing it back. Lost 40 people in 3 days. They've kept this location off all official maps ever since, forbidden their own agents from approaching it. But you know about it. I found it by accident 20 years ago. Thought I'd found some new species to document. Then I saw the warning markers, did the research, talked to the few locals old enough to remember the stories their grandparents told. He pulled out a worn journal, showed me sketches and notes. Omega is old, Caleb. Older than the mountains themselves. It's not an animal or even a creature in any conventional sense. It's something else. Something that exists in the spaces between our understanding of reality. I thought about Victor's tablet showing all the red markers. The subject spread across the restricted zone in what I'd thought was random distribution. But looking at Noah's maps, I could see the pattern. They formed rings, layers of defense, all centered on this sinkhole. The Enclave's tagging program, I said slowly. It's disrupting the defense system. Exactly. Every tag they place interferes with natural behaviors, makes the creatures agitated, drives them away from their posts. The more the Enclave tries to monitor and control them, the weaker the containment becomes. And eventually, Omega wakes up fully, tests the boundaries, finds them weak, and comes out to see what's changed in the world above. A sound echoed from the pit, not loud but deep, a resonance that I felt in my chest rather than heard with my ears. The trees around us shuddered, though there was no wind. It's been getting more active, Noah said quietly. The last 3 months, I've recorded seismic activity that doesn't match any natural pattern. Something down there is moving, testing, preparing. We need to tell someone, warn the Enclave that their program is... They know, Noah's voice was bitter. Not all of them, maybe, but someone high up in their organization knows exactly what they're doing. They think they can study Omega, understand it, maybe even control it. That's why they're pushing for neuromonitoring. They want to map how the Sentinel species respond to Omega's presence, see if they can replicate those responses artificially. That's insane. That's ambition. The chance to understand something that defies all known science. To them, it's worth the risk. Another sound from the pit, louder this time. I swear I felt something like attention focusing on us, like whatever was down there had become aware of our presence. We should go, I said. Noah nodded. Yeah, being here too long, it notices, and when it notices, things get complicated. We backed away from the sinkhole, keeping our eyes on the darkness below until the trees obscured it from view. Even then, I could feel it. A pressure at the base of my skull, a whisper at the edge of hearing. We hiked for an hour before Noah spoke again. You understand now why I do this? Why I've spent 20 years fighting the Enclave? You're trying to protect the world from something it doesn't know exists, from something it shouldn't have to know exists. These mountains have guarded that secret for thousands of years. The Enclave's arrogance, their belief that everything can be studied and controlled, it's going to break that containment. And when it does, the consequences will spread far beyond these mountains. So, what do? We can't stop the Enclave. We destroyed one shipment of equipment. They'll just bring in more. Noah was quiet for a long time, navigating through the darkening forest with practiced ease. Finally, he said, There might be another way. If we can't stop the Enclave from the outside, maybe we can change them from within. You want to recruit Enclave agents? I want to show them what they're really dealing with. Make them understand that their protocols are based on incomplete information. Not all of them are true believers. Some, like you, will see the truth and act on it. It was a long shot. The Enclave had screening processes, loyalty tests, protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of infiltration. But I thought about Victor, about the weariness in his eyes, the way he'd come alone to talk to me. There were people in the organization who had doubts, who might be persuaded. How do we start? With the one person who might actually listen. Victor Lane. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Victor just told me I'm an enemy of the organization. And you told him every life matters, every choice matters. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need inside the Enclave. If we can convince him that their current path leads to catastrophe, it's still a long shot. Better than hiding in caves for the rest of our lives. Noah stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley, where we could see the distant lights of civilization beyond the restricted zone. The world down there has no idea what's up here, what's been guarded for them. We have a responsibility to make sure that guardianship continues, even if it means working with people who see us as enemies. I looked at those distant lights, thought about Trevor Morrison recovering in a hospital, unaware of what he'd almost encountered. Thought about all the other people living their lives, protected by creatures they'd never see and systems they'd never understand. I'll contact Victor, I said, see if he's willing to listen. And if he's not, then we find someone who is. Or we keep fighting from the outside, but we try the diplomatic approach first. Noah smiled. You really were a ranger once, weren't you? Still trying to protect and serve. Old habits. We made camp that night on the ridge, watching the stars emerge through gaps in the tree canopy. In the distance, I could hear the subjects moving through their territories, following patterns established long before humans arrived in these mountains. And somewhere beneath the earth, something ancient and terrible waited, patient and eternal, while the creatures above kept their vigil. I fell asleep thinking about the choice I'd made. To break protocol, to save one life instead of following orders. It had seemed like a small decision at the time, barely worth considering. But small choices led to big consequences. One civilian saved led to one alliance formed. One alliance led to understanding. Understanding led to purpose. Maybe that was what redemption really meant. Not avoiding punishment, not following protocols, but making choices that mattered, even when they cost you everything. Especially when they cost you everything.